Hello, in today's lesson we're going to talk about the various control methods that we have built into the Integra receivers. We're going to start from the most basic method and work our way up to the more involved, more complex method. So the first method is the 12-volt trigger. Now all Integra receivers have 3 of these triggers. They are fully assignable by source and or by zone, and we can assign them with or without delays. The main advantages to using a 12-volt trigger, it's a very simple control method. Simply, when the 12-volt trigger is activated, if it's plugged into another device such as a screen, we can drop that screen, and when we take power away from the 12-volt trigger, when the receiver turns off, the screen goes back up into the ceiling. We can use it for things like lifts and screens. We can trigger shades and things of that nature. So it's a very simple on-off, open-close type of triggering method. We can also use it to trigger things like external amplifiers, which are traditionally a dumb device. They don't really have a lot of control. So when the 12-volt trigger, when the Integra receiver turns on, we can trigger another amplifier to turn on as well. And when the Integra receiver turns off, that other amplifier turns off. So it's very simple, very easy. The disadvantages are that most devices do not have a 12-volt trigger input on them. So it's really on-off type devices or up-down type of devices like screens and amplifiers. The next type of control method is infrared. This is by far the most common control method, and it's very simple. It's been around for a long time. It's what we use to control most every type of electronic device. So extremely common, extremely simple. We can use the back panel IR inputs for a more secure type of connection, or we also have an infrared port on the front panel, so you can take the factory remote, aim it at the unit, and control it that way as well. With Integra, we also have an IR output. So the advantage of that is if we're coming into the back panel from a control system and issuing IR commands into the back, into IR input A or IR input B, we can then come out of the output and sort of daisy chain to control other devices downstream. So for instance, you can come into the back of the Integra with a single IR input to control the Integra receiver, and then go out of the output to control an Integra Blu-ray player or a third-party device such as a television or cable box. So it makes a very simple way to come in and go out. And when we're using the back panel connections, again, it's very secure, much more secure than trying to use the IR flashers on the front panel. The disadvantage is that infrared can be somewhat unreliable. If there's a lot of light, if there's sunlight, plasma lights, fluorescent lights, things like that are shining on the front panel infrared window, those light sources can interfere with the infrared signal. So the other disadvantages are that if we're controlling via infrared, we don't have feedback from the receiver or the device to tell the control system whether or not the device in fact turned on or turned off, or what the volume level is and those type of things. So it's a one-way control method, so we don't get information back from the Integra receiver when we're using it. The next control method is RS-232. RS-232 is a somewhat common control method. It's been around for a long time. It's a secure connection. You screw the RS-232 terminal to the back of the receiver, so it's nice and tight. You don't have to worry about it coming out or coming apart. And the other big advantage is that it's two-way. So if a control system tells the Integra receiver to turn on, once the receiver turns on, it can then send the information back to the control system and say, yes, I did turn on, and here's my volume level, and here's what source I'm on. So the control system can then use that information to make sure things are happening the way the control system wants them to happen. We also get what's called metadata. So if we're using an internal network source like Pandora or Sirius Internet Radio or something of that nature, we can get information about what's playing. The timestamp on the track, the artist, the album, and all that information can be fed back to a control system, to something like a touch panel, a user remote, an iPad, things of that nature, so that the end user can see exactly what's going on. So lots of information coming back through that. The disadvantages to RS-232 control are that it's not as common support with control systems. The more simplified control systems support only infrared or maybe only Ethernet control. And with RS-232, there are certain commands and certain feedback mechanisms that are not sent from the Integra receivers. Some of the metadata is not available from RS-232 that is available from the next control method, which is Ethernet. The last disadvantage is that it is a less common cabling, less common termination method, and the installer has to be careful of how things are terminated. We use specific termination points, so if they don't know that termination method, or they don't know how to set up the control and the speed of the control and that kind of thing, then it can be a little bit more complex. And then the last control method is Ethernet. Now, Ethernet is IP control, so it's just simple networking. It's very, very common in the cabling. It's category 5, category 6 type of cabling. Very common in the termination methods. It's a simple RJ45 connection. So any anybody that knows computer networks or knows networking most likely knows how to terminate this connection, how to put it into a router or a switch, and it's really where we're going with the future of control. You always hear the term Internet of Things. This is the Ethernet control method. So we can talk to other devices over the network. It can be wired or it can be wireless, and again, it's a secure connection in the back panel. It's just more reliable and just more secure than like infrared control. The other big advantage is, just like RS-232, we get a lot of information back from the receiver. We can find out what source is on, what the volume levels are, what tuner stations are set, and all that type of thing. So all this information can be fed back to a touch panel device, an iPad, a phone, things of that nature, and so that the end user can in fact see what's happening with the system. The disadvantages are that, again, it's not supported by all control systems. It is very common, but not all control systems do support Ethernet. And then because it's Ethernet, it's on the network backbone. So if you have a problem, the router goes down, the switch goes down, there's a problem with the internet, then we also lose control of the receiver. So it is very common and becoming more and more useful, but again, we're relying on the network backbone and infrastructure to control everything. And in just a minute, we'll take a look at how we can use these and kind of how to set these up and send some test commands, and we'll take a look at the actual back panels of a unit.